Well, welcome everyone, and welcome once again to our next codon ring. And I think we're nearing the end. I think we only have one more after this. And so what is this week's codon ring? It is the Ring of the Whirlwind. Now we've already been in it. The Ring of the Whirlwind started February 7th to the 11th with gene key 49. And the other gene key that is in this codon ring is gene key 55. And that one is coming up February 19th through the 23rd of February. So basically this whole month. And what is the Hebrew number that these gene keys and hexagrams originate from? It is Hebrew number 20, or Resh. Now Resh is called a double number. And a double number means that this number or energy holds polarity experiences of its frequency. So this number is called war to peace, and it represents degrees of movement. So of course, this is the ring of the whirlwind. There's lots of movement in there. And so we either are at war, we are stagnant in our energy, or we are at peace, where we are moving with the flow. Okay, so let me show you a picture of what it looks like. Here we go. Okay, I'm sure you're seeing it. So Resh literally means head or brain, and it represents fire in the head. And it represents the patterns and structures and constructs that we live by that fire us up. And they fire us up every time, or we have reactions when someone speaks out or tries to pull us outside of our construct, or something shakes us up outside of our little box that we're living in. So it's fire in the head. Okay, so I'm going to stop share. Let's see, I'm back. And what else do I want to say? It's number 20. The two numbers that make up this energy is the number 2, which is the divine mother. It is the Kundalini fire, but it's also 0. And although we didn't cover 0, 0 and 1 are the same but different. Like 0 comes before the 1, but it represents. And sometimes in the Hebrew numbering, they start the 1 at the 0, if that makes sense, but not in the Hebrew alphabet in like Tarot. Anyway, I'm confusing the situation. So let's get back on track. Anyway, the 0 represents like the air, the air that hovers above the lands of creation, right? It's the ineffable wind. So that's where you get kind of like this wind and fire. The ring of the whirlwind is wind and fire. And it's about, this letter represents the fire when it reaches your head, when Kundalini reaches your head, it gets in there and it destroys all of your concepts and beliefs. So that's what that's all about. So what else do I want to say? Yeah, and you can, and this fire is represented in the hexagrams. 49 is lake over fire, and 55 is thunder over fire. So there you go. Resh is one of the most creative letters in the Hebrew alphabet because it represents resurrection, creative force, creation, force of creation. And it represents the resurrection that we experience when everything in us that is impure has been killed off. It is, this resurrection represents total psychological death, or the death of the I. There's no more I. So it's creating the no self. Okay. So this represents resurrection. Resh also represents new beginnings. It is the number that initiates or starts something new. And it's slightly different from the ring of origin. I think it was Hebrew 7 or gene key 41, emanation, where that was also new beginnings, but that number represents the space just before the new beginnings actually take action. Okay, so it's like we have the 6 lines of the hexagram, and then we have, we have line 6, and then we have line 1. Well, 7, or the ring of origin, represents the space in between, that we take a pause in between. We take a pause in the great wind. We just take a breath, and then something begins to happen. And 20 is that something that begins to happen. Okay, so what else? Resh is new beginnings. It's fresh, so it's Resh. And it represents the fire of our consciousness. And of course, that consciousness can be asleep or awake. It could be at war or at peace. And of course, like I mentioned earlier, the fire here relates to Kundalini, which is our consciousness. And Kundalini takes, so Resh, the number Resh is made up of Aleph, Vav, and Resh. And it represents, Aleph is the great wind, and 6 is the Kundalini. Kundalini takes the great wind that hovers over the waters of creation and creates that fire of consciousness. It travels up our spine, which is number 6, and then it hits our brain, or the Makara point, and it activates the pineal and pituitary glands. And that's when you really get the burning off of all of these embedded programs, samskaras, and vasanas within your subtle body. They actually begin to be burned away. And when this happens, when Kundalini reaches that Makara point and has purified enough of the subtle body, and the pituitary and pineals are, let's say, consistently active. So when Kundalini reaches Makara, it really stimulates these 2 glands on a more consistent basis. And when enough of the psychological body has been burned off, and the person is more stabilized in a peaceful state and a non-attached state, and in the no self state, then this is what creates the halo that you often see around many of the great teachers. So Resh creates that halo of light. It turns the fire into the light. Okay, what else here? Oh yes, because it's fire in the head, the message from the 20, from Resh, says we have to care for our brains, meaning our central nervous system and our brains. So it is warning us, it's not just all the thoughts and constructs that create fire in the head, but it's also what we take in, through our senses, because Resh represents our senses. What do we see? What do we listen to? What do we watch? What do we consume that affects the physiology of our brain and central nervous system? So it says things like no alcohol, no cigarettes, chemical substances, no caffeine, because that's a stimulant, definitely no sugar. And I'm sorry, many people out there are use marijuana, but many, I've never heard one highly respected, enlightened teacher say that marijuana was good for you, unless of course there's a medical condition. But things like marijuana, where there's a consistent use, and it absolutely does no good for the central nervous system, and it absolutely dampens, in the long run, more consistent use, the pineals and pituitary, and the ability for consciousness to rise past a certain point. Hope that isn't too controversial. Anyway, so Resh wants us to be aware of what we take in, all things, okay? I have plenty of work to do on that front. Although I have cut back on caffeine, I just have a little tiny bit, but mostly I'm decaf. Anyway, and sugar. Okay, so enough of that. Let's see, the planet associated with this is Saturn. The major arcana is the Fool. Affected physiologies is the solar plexus. And the message from the 20's greatest fear, of course, is the fear of the unknown. So it's constantly seeking certainty. And of course, the way it seeks certainty is through those tightly held belief systems because it makes them feel right and safe and everybody else wrong. Yeah, so that's the fear and a message, one of the messages from 20. Another aspect of the 20 is like 19 and 20 are the two numbers of the Hebrew alphabet that hold the dark and the evil forces in the physical world. They are considered the life support system of evil and the dark forces of the the ego in this world. And, you know, you may be surprised to hear that, but they play a very good role of holding the dark forces in our world. And that role is to give us a choice. Okay. Something to work on. I mean, if 19 and 20, if Kuf and Resh did not hold the dark forces here, well, we'd be living in paradise. There would be no work to do. Okay, what else? And so numbers 19 and 20, they are what keep you asleep, right? Those concepts and the idea of the I and the me. So when you see 20 showing up, 2020, 2020, and maybe 2020 was a good example of all of this. Yeah, so think of 2020, think of the shadow aspect. This is what Resh is trying to tell you, and it's representing war, fear of the unknown, stuck or stagnant energy. It's also very cold energy. It is the unexamined, the unexplored life, the mind, feeling stuck between a rock and a hard place, like you're in an argument with somebody or something, and it's going nowhere, and it's that really stuck energy. No one's going to budge, no one's going to give. And it's the 20 also represents doing what you think the collective ego wants you to do. So you're stuck in that construct rather than following your inner truth. The 20 plays the victim game, stuck within rigid belief systems, particularly religious or spiritual, and obviously political. Lack of commitment. You are acting foolish, reckless, lawless, complaining, blaming. You're inert or have no reactions. You're rejecting. And at the worst, 20 can be this very bipolar, manic, depressive behavior and mentality. Okay. So the healthy Resh is peace. It is movement, flowing, going with the flow, accepting change. It is the attitude of seeking to better oneself, to grow, to realize that everything is always changing. Changes are okay. It is a peaceful, infinite potential kind of energy. It is a state of innocence. It's walking joyfully into the world, you know, this innocent little being walking around, no fear, not expecting, not projecting, just seeing life as it is, not fearing what's around the corner. And it means, of course, new beginnings are starting. When you're in the healthy Resh, there's always going to be new beginnings, new adventures, new journeys. 20 is all about optimism, freedom, of course, 55, revolution, of course, 55, no constraints or boxes to live within. Each day is an adventure, believing anything can happen. It is simple, no worries, never giving up and never wanting to quit. Always just, I'm going to keep working and working and working to purify as much as I can. Okay, so just remember, Resh is fresh. And watch what you take into your senses and your body. We want to purify not just our psychological and spiritual bodies, but also our brain and our central nervous system. Okay, until next time.